Hello and welcome to the AFL High Performance Podcast. This is our footballers update. So if you're an Aussie rules footballer at any level, community, state, or pro, this will be engaging for yourself. A few takeaways regarding how to return back to running after a injury, whether it be calf, hamstring, your knee, ankle. I'm going to keep it pretty clear and hopefully build some clarity around best practice from a strength and conditioning point of view, how we work with a physiotherapist, but also from a footballer's perspective, just to get a bit of a better understanding of how things are done at the professional level. So if you are working at a community level or state league level, you can get hopefully a better education around how to manage yourself, both from a mental mindset point of view throughout your rehab, which is critical, as well as the physical aspect and having clear goals and a clear criteria to progress. We'll also discuss for the practitioners tuning in the accelerated model versus conservative, as well as the importance of communication, both with the athlete as well as the team around the athlete to best support them to return back to not just play, but performance as well. So we'll start with your key markers. So that's typically, as a reconditioning coach, rehab coach, will work closely with the medical team to create a criteria for each phase, whether it be the sort of restoration phase, whether they're gaining back their mobility from an injury, whether it be hamstring, ankle, or shoulder, for example. So getting that range of motion back. Then we'll have like a reload phase where the gym is really critical. So building back some strength markers, ideally back to their baseline as a minimum. However, sometimes you may need to compromise their absolute max because that can take a bit longer. For example, like a shoulder, you may want to delay your benchmark scores like a bench press. When someone's coming back from a shoulder injury, they may be modified with their upper body strength, but their ASH test, their isometric strength, would want to return back to baseline. So they're in their vulnerable positions, overhead or outstretched for a tackle, particularly in contact sports. Obviously, that's going to be critical. So developing the strength markers specific to the shoulder girdle is critical when returning back to a contact sport. If it's a calf, for example, our strength markers will be things like endurance first. So can they do 30 rep calf raise for an AFL athlete? You may modify that for a heavier base athlete, maybe league or union, maybe around 20 to 25. Again, just look at the research as well as look at the baseline of what that athlete had done. So if you had done a screening in pre-season and you profiled your group and that athlete had completed 20 rep calf raise on left and right and strained their gastroc, we'd want to return them back to that marker. But then you're also looking for lenses. Well, why did they break down? Why did the calf break down? Was it a fatigue-based aspect that happened later in the game? And perhaps 20 is not good enough. And that's hence why they didn't, one of the reasons why they got injured. So we actually want to return them better. So taking a bit longer through the reload phase to develop them above baseline before going through your on-field progressions. Because as we know, as we start running and developing and involving the football, involving sprinting, involving more endurance-based running, becomes a lot harder to reach new capacities in the gym, as there's a lot of conflicting stimuluses going on for the athlete to adapt to. So early on in the reload phase is the best time to maximize strength and power, and we want to make sure we've got really clear processes in what the athlete needs to achieve to earn the right to progress throughout each phase. Then after the reload phase, so they've hit all their strength and power metrics. So, for example, your hamstring, it may be returning them back to their barbell RDL baseline score, their Nord board score, and maybe a single leg hip thrust score, for example, from a strength point of view. If you're not doing eccentrics, Nordics, you may be looking at like an isometric hamstring strength, whatever it is, some form of knee and hip based hamstring strength where you're isolating that hamstring and looking at the deficit and trying to return them back to previous baseline scores before they're sprinting. Because as we know, the faster we run with a hamstring, the rate of activation of the hamstring will work during the running gait exponentially gets higher and higher as we get closer to faster speeds. So really important we've got that good isometric and eccentric strength before we expose the hamstring to that. It's also a bit of a screen as well. Is the hamstring ready to be able to expose it to high intensity? So once they've hit that reloading markers, they'll then move into reconditioning, where now we want to expose the tissue or the joint to game demands if they're in season, or if it's in pre-season, start bridging the gap towards getting them back to where the group's going from a pre-season load over a week. So they're looking at the schedule. We're starting to align their loading days. If there's back-to-back days, we're aligning that for not just the injury, but also for the rest of the body. So when they go back to the main group training, their body's used to doing back-to-back sessions from an on-field point of view. They're used to sprinting, accelerating, change direction, skills. So we want to make sure we're exposing that athlete to all those on-field capacities, but also returning them back to some physical metrics as well. So what's their max velocity, critical for hamstrings and calves. If it's groins, what's their accel decel, and what do they normally get in a typical preseason session, or if it's a game, using the game as what we want to work back from. So are they a inside player where accel decel and the density of that is really high, or are they more an outside player where maybe high speed, which is moving around 20 k's per hour, and sprint distance around that 25.5 k's per hour? Is that a really important metric to return them to? So it should all be relative to how they play the game and what they typically cover, whether you're in the pre-season or the in-season model. And then ultimately, it's just the performance phase. So if it's a long-term injury, like an ACL, they've been out for 9 months, you're going to want a month of full uninterrupted team training, where they're training with the group anywhere to 2 to 3 times a week, plus a match day session on the weekend. And that sets them up to mitigate risk of injury, but also when they come back to playing, they're able to back it up the following week. So you're really enhancing their ability to perform and as well as recover, because they've got a good chronic load under them. Whereas if you only do a couple of weeks of training and you've had a late ramp and they don't have that good chronic load under them, maybe you'll get through, but your ability to perform and back up the following week is compromised. So we want to make sure they're hitting the ground running from that first game, and that's where time in team training is critical. So every injury is a bit different. Obviously, like a 2-3 week hemi, you may only need a 1 week of full training and then return back to game, for an example. So that's the different phases, from that healing restoration phase, from that reload sort of strength phase, to then obviously the reconditioning, and then lastly the performance phase. And there should be objective markers all the way through. And in an ideal world, you'd like to make some gains where the athlete has actually got better from an athletic point of view, because you have so much time with them that you want to make sure that and it's a challenging time, that they're from a physical point of view, they're actually better than when they were before the injury. So that might be, if it's a lower limb injury, it could be a bench, maybe the coaches and the performance staff identify that their upper body strength is not to standard. So putting in a strong bench press emphasis and upper body strength emphasis to build some body armor, but also to give that athlete more confidence that they're actually enhanced than where they were prior to injury. And that just helps with their overall motivation as well. It gives them a bit of a distraction that's not connected to the injury, some physical work that they can pour all their energy into and make progress with. Because as we know with rehab, it's not always linear. There's going to be a little bit of setbacks, and that's completely normal because we're pushing the boundaries to maximize the return. In terms of like whether we want to accelerate or have the more conservative sort of model, so it's also known as like performance model compared to medical model. There's a time and place for both. So if you're doing remote programming, you're not getting a finger on the pulse in terms of how time with the athlete, and you're not working closely with a team and that athlete, and having that holistic approach where everyone's working and seeing the athlete every day. That's where the medical conservative model can work really well. And that can be like when athletes are in off season, we're not going to ramp them if we're not being able to make decisions on the fly in the moment, depending on how the athlete has assessed that morning, both clinically as well as their measurement strengths, that can give us confidence to be able to make more aggressive progressions in session. And equally, if how they're assessed and how they're feeling and how they're moving on the field, at times you need to regress. Now, when you don't have that ability with the athlete, that like in a remote sense, that's where probably a conservative medical model makes sense, and you're more time-based rather than criteria, because you're not going to be able to assess the athlete, and your assessments are going to have to be quite simple because the athlete will be doing those on their own. You're not getting eyes on it. So for example, you're not going to get them to do like a CT cuff ISO assessment by themselves. You might get them to film a hop, for example. So you can still do some measurements, but they're probably not going to be to the gold standard. So therefore, having a time-based approach on, 2 weeks for the reloading phase to get and monitor their strength progressions, a couple of weeks for reintegration into team training, and then ultimately going back to playing, they need to be able to have a full match load session, which you might use the GPS, for example. So time can come into context there. However, when we're in a full-time environment, you've got a psychologist, physios, doctors, coaches, and you're seeing the athlete every day. That's where the accelerator model can be quite handy. But we still want to take into account the time of the year. Like if it's in October, it's not necessary to take risks and accelerate. So that's where we can just take our time to maximize each phase. What's their injury history? If they're highly injury prone, we're probably not going to accelerate as fast as some others that maybe this is their first injury, and they're just ticking all those criteria off really quickly. That will give you a good amount of insurance that you can probably accelerate this circumstance. And then, of course, the pathology, if it's a back to the calf scenario, we know with aponeurosis, tendon involvement, it's a high risk if we run early within the first sort of 10 to 12 days. So that's where time can come into account. And no matter what you do to accelerate, just simply because of that pathology, you're putting yourself at risk a couple of weeks down the track when you're doing that intention metrics, because the injury perhaps hasn't scarred up as much as we would like. And that's really hard for the athlete to be able to give feedback during that time. So that's where time and learning from experience and through review and reflection, that's where time can be quite handy for that particular pathology. Where there's others like a hamstring, we know is slow speed running, the athlete can tolerate that. It's low strain on the hamstring. And as long as they continue to progress their strength markers, we know we can pretty much get from a volume point of view, almost in the first week, pretty close to where they were pre-injury, or certainly in the second week. So therefore, later on in the rehab, week 2, week 3, we're just increasing the high intensity actions. The volume's pretty much maintained from a chronic low point of view throughout. So that's where working close with the medical team is critical to get a really good understanding of how accelerated can we go with this particular athlete due to their history, due to the context of the time of the year, and due to the pathology. Expert opinions, absolute must. So if you're having a real troubling injury and they've had a setback and you're scratching your head, they've ticked up all the markers, and they just keep getting injured or re-injured, that's where getting an expert opinion in just gives clarity for the whole team, including the athlete, but also just, helps you go about things slightly different. You're going to learn as a practitioner because that's an expert in that particular injury, whether it be ACLs, whether it be calves, hamstrings, groins. So no doubt you'll learn as a practitioner, but also the athlete is going to feel like it's the best practice, and that you're not just making the same mistakes twice, that you're actually reviewing things when things don't go to plan. So don't be afraid as a practitioner to seek expert advice and get a consult. Really important that you go to those consultations, though. There needs to be a support there for the athlete, just to build clarity around how to absorb that information that the expert has given, and make sure that everyone's on the same page. Mental strategies and coping. So that's where leaders at the footy club can be super helpful. No doubt athletes are all a part of the game. It's a brutal game in AFL. So having support from your peers is really important. Support from the coaches. They can feel really disconnected and sometimes separate from the group. It can be a lonely place, rehab. So any time, whether it be craft sort of stat skills, get them involved. Main group warm-ups if they're ready, get them involved. Any opportunity to integrate, go for it, because then the athlete's going to feel really normal, and it's going to help them feel connected to the group, and that's critical in team sport. So mental strategies around that really helps. seek the sports psychologist's advice as well around what helps that athlete tick. Are they someone that likes to see the whole plan? Are they more day by day? Are they visually based? Are they more, how do we work best with that athlete in terms of what's their motivation and how they like to be managed? And then from a comms point of view as well, I really like Alan Murdoch's podcast. Make sure to check that out. And he talked recently about, rather than having a pain scale, which is pretty common, it's something I've used in the past. And there's some athletes that just find that really hard to quantify a number to their pain. So it's just a simple way of awareness and danger that Alan talked about. So awareness, we're comfortable to crack on, respect it, but we're comfortable to continue with the activity largely, obviously depending on what it is and the pathology and that athlete. But more often than not, crack in, continue on. Danger, that's where we need to regress and change what we're currently doing, or change the exercise or the intensity that it's being done at, or perhaps just come up with a constraint to help the athlete adapt to that and make an efficiency change. So awareness or danger, really, I've been using that lately, and I find that's really effective for the athlete to understand. And communication is critical. The only person who knows how they're feeling is the athlete themselves. So they're a huge resource. We can do all this objective testing, but they've got a wealth of information that is critical for us to know as practitioners to help them. So I think that's a really good way to give them clarity on what to communicate, awareness or danger. That's it for this topic. If you enjoyed this episode, whether you're listening to the live YouTube episode or on our podcast, make sure to subscribe to the podcast, give it a rating. It allows us to reach more listeners. It only takes you a second, wherever you're listening to a podcast. And if you have any questions or recommendations, coming to the end of the year for 2024 and starting to plan out, we've got a few people in the pipeline, like Alex Arcadian from Head of Performance at St Kilda, Les Spellman, a sprint expert, Bolan Couples, and Aaron Scully coming on for the rugby background in the new year. And then Greg Haff at 9:30 p.m. on the 10th of December is booked in. Perhaps will be our last live interview for the year. So make sure he's an absolute jet when it comes to periodization. So if that's something that interests you, tune in live on our YouTube. And if you have any questions or recommendations for guests, email me at jack@pelicapro.com, or you can direct message us on any of our socials. Thanks for tuning in. I will see you on the next episode.